All right. My name is Xiuhtezcatl Martinez, 15-year-old climate warrior.
Victoria Barrett, 17-year-old youth activist.
Achim Steiner, age irrelevant, but also an activist for the environment and people.
Beautiful, man. Well, we see a lot of faces in this room, most of them not as young as ours. How do you think young people have a role? Do you think that young people have a role to play in this world of really, strict policy and there's a lot of important things that go into being a United Nations delegate? How do young people play a role in that?
First of all, by not accepting the status quo. I think that is the privilege of young people, and it frees you up. It actually liberates you to ask the questions, to reject the answers, and to come up with ideas about how the future might look like in 10 or 20 years. That is not just an extraction of what is today's reality. Secondly, I think it is also the enthusiasm of knowing what it means to think from one generation to another, because much of your life right now is the product of other people's decisions. So you understand better than anyone what happens to the next generation that will not have a choice. And we are here in these halls this week because of, yes, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Climate Agreement. These are agendas that will either leave a terrible or worse world for the next generation, or actually give options and keep options open. And I think that's why you guys belong in here, and I think in some ways you are rhetorically gifted and have a sense of purpose and enthusiasm that you can stand up in front of 193 nations like you did last September, you did this morning, and actually move a hall of people who are normally just embedded in their negotiations.
And since you did just highlight the importance of youth in these decision-making processes, what do you think the United Nations could do to make it more inclusive for students like us? So it's not just me and Xiuhtezcatl here, but more people our age that can be included in the processes.
Well, first of all, I think, as you have now experienced, opening up the United Nations to the voice of youth being heard. But let's also be clear, we don't want you guys only to now all move into the negotiating corridors and the halls of the General Assembly or the climate change conventions. Your real work and your impact is actually out there. So it's not just about bringing more young people into the UN, it's about connecting what the UN does also to what you are trying to do in your communities, whether your families, your schools, your clubs, whatever it may be. And that's when we create not just an engagement of youth in the halls of the United Nations, but actually we create a connection between the energy that you can mobilize. And at the end of the day, the majority of the people alive today are young people in the world. Not so much in the developed countries, but in the developing nations. So your constituency is the biggest of all. And we need to make sure that these younger people out there also understand that even with all the contradictions that we have happening every day in the United Nations and the big politics playing out here, that this is actually a very sacred space. The Charter of the United Nations that starts with "We the People" is something that you guys also have to help defend every day, because politics and economic interests and all that often defines the perception of the United Nations is not inevitable, especially when people outside are paying attention.
I love that. I really can connect to that as far as saying that, the job of being a political leader in any country in the world is incredibly challenging. So how can we help take the weight off of the shoulders of our political leaders by helping support young people in their communities, in their schools, to make that difference, to help support young leadership all over the place? I have a question that what gives you hope about this movement? Because climate change is really depressing, for anybody. This is a really huge problem that affects every living person on the planet. What gives you hope? What keeps you going? What keeps you coming to this back every single year? And the COP, meetings, 21 years, it seemed like not a lot got done in those 21 years, but finally we got, something on paper. What gives you hope to keep fighting for what you believe in?
Seeing the change that is actually possible when things align. And I think that's very important. You asked at the beginning, what can young people do to also help politicians? I think very often in the advocacy movements we focus on what is wrong and to critique and criticize, and that is correct. But you actually have far greater influence than you often imagine also in proposing solutions and making solutions possible. Politicians very often are not necessarily leaders, they are followers. They follow public opinion, they follow economic interests. They have to sometimes just mediate in order to keep a society functional. Where you guys come in is you can create the public momentum, the awareness that allows a political leader, be they a prime minister or even a CEO in a company, to make the change happen. Now, I am part of the system in a sense because I've now been Executive Director of the United Nations Environment for 10 years. And why am I optimistic? Because I've seen what groundswell of change is happening across the world, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's communities, whether it is even in this hall here, where in the year 2016 we're now seeing environmental sustainability, equity issues being represented by everyone. It's no longer us as environmental constituencies who have to knock on the doors and try and persuade people. Renewable energy today is the future of the energy of the world. And 10 years ago, we were laughed at for saying that this is the future. So sometimes it takes patience, but never be dissuaded from being hard in your advocacy, because I think that's essentially where you challenge the comfort zone of those who just want to go on with business as usual. Okay?
Thank you very much. This is Xiuhtezcatl and Victoria Barrett, ready to change the world and chill.
Signing off.
Signing off. Okay.
I appreciate it.
Nice
Pleasure to
see
meet you. Good to see you again, man.
Good work.
Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye-bye.